Week 7 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers I will bench this week. The first guy is Jacoby Meyers of the New England Patriots. So Jacoby Meyers, they're projecting him a lot of points this week here versus the New York Jets, 16 fantasy points. And Meyers, he's been pretty decent this season, believe it or not, for this New England Patriot team. But in this ball game versus the Jets, I think it's going to be a lot of running early and often, a lot of Damian Harris and Stevenson in this ball game, and the tight ends getting into the mix in Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. So this week, Jacoby Meyers, I don't think he'll have the greatest of games, and I just don't see him doing much. Last week versus Dallas, 5 catches, 44 yards, and a 2-point conversion. And week 5 versus a weak Houston Texan team, only 4 catches, 56 yards. So I don't see a big fantasy day out of him. And he's the first wide receiver I would bench this week. The second guy is Julio Jones of the Tennessee Titans. So Julio Jones, I don't know if he's going to play in this game. He's day-to-day, once again re-aggravating that hamstring injury. And Julio Jones, his best days might be behind him now, because each and every season it just looks like he pulls that hamstring and he's never going to be 100%. And that hamstring injury is obviously a tricky and a very difficult injury to get 100% from. And right here, he did play in week 6, which was good to see, with 3 catches, 59 yards, and he left the ball game in that one with the injury. So week 7, it's a decent matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But right here, I just can't trust Julio Jones anymore. He's always injured. He's in and out of ball games, and he's not the big fantasy guy like he was 2 or 3 seasons ago. So this week, I don't want to deal with the headache, even with all the bye weeks, and I would just bench him. The next wide receiver is Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. So Allen Robinson, it hasn't been a productive year at all for him this season, with 1 double-digit fantasy game in the first 6 this year in PPR leagues. And week 7, he's got a matchup at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who I know give up the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. But Allen Robinson, like I mentioned, he's not getting the job done. He's not having any impact, and he was drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round of most fantasy leagues this season. So the last few games for him: week 4 versus Detroit, 3 catches, 63 yards. Week 5 at Vegas, 4 catches, 32 yards. And week 6 versus the Green Bay Packers, 4 catches, 53 yards. So him and Justin Fields right now, they're just not on the same page. And this Bear offensive line don't give Fields that much time as well. And he holds on to the ball long as well. So right here, a lot of factors going against Allen Robinson in this passing game. And this week versus Tampa Bay, he's going to be a vocal point, in my opinion, for them to stop him. And I would just bench him if I got better options. The next wide receiver is Rodel Beckham Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns, this team is banged up and battered. And you could include Odell Beckham in on the mix as well. He didn't practice on Tuesday, and he's a questionable game-time decision for this ball game here on Thursday Night Football versus the Denver Broncos. So right here, this Brown team is very banged up with a lot of injuries. Baker Mayfield, he's not playing. Case Keenum starting. Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, they're out in this game, with Ernest Johnson starting, and the O-line's banged up as well. So right here, it's going to be a tough game for a lot of Browns. The only guy I really would start, in my opinion, this week from this Browns offense is Ernest Johnson. Everyone else, it's going to be tough to see what they're going to do and see if they're going to get a decent workload. But right here, Odell Beckham, he hasn't been the same in many seasons since he left the New York Giants with injuries and just a lack of production as well. It was good to see him come back last week versus the Arizona Cardinals. But once again, like I mentioned, he left that game briefly with a shoulder problem, and he didn't practice on Tuesday, and he's a game-time decision on Thursday Night Football. So right here, I just don't want to deal with the headache as well with Beckham, and I would bench him. In the 5th and final receiver I will bench this week's Tyler Boyd of the Cincinnati Bengals. So I recommended to drop Boyd early in the week, but a lot of people still held on to him, where he's owned in 82% of fantasy leagues. And right here, ever since T. Higgins came back to the lineup for the Cincinnati Bengal team the last 2 games, Tyler Boyd's been a non-factor. 4 catches, 24 yards versus Green Bay in week 5. And then last week at Detroit, non-existent, 1 catch for 7 yards on 3 targets. So right here, Tyler Boyd, he's the odd man out in that receiving corps over there in Cincinnati. And he's a guy, yeah, if you want to hold on to him, fine, but no way I could start him with confidence this week, even with a lot of bye weeks going on, because Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are the 2 main targets over there in Cincinnati. So that's a few wide receivers I will bench in week 7 of the fantasy football season.